I want to start off tonight by taking a poll. So bear with me and play along, okay? If you've ever, in the entirety of your education, gotten a bad grade, please raise your hand. Okay, amazing, thank you. Now don't be shy, and if you've ever somehow gotten more than one bad grade, maybe 5, 10, 500, no one's judging, raise your hand. Okay. Now finally, if somehow, despite those bad grades, you still feel like you're on a path towards leading a successful and fulfilled life, please raise your hand. And I want you to keep those hands raised. Take a moment and look around. Look at how many other people have their hands raised as well. Okay, amazing. Put your hands down. What that poll just demonstrated is an idea that to you might seem completely natural and second nature, but in the world of education, it's a little bit foreign. And that's the idea that our success is not defined by the grades we get or the numbers that we're given, but by the amount of effort that we put into our endeavors and the potential that we actualize. And this idea is the main concept behind the educational philosophy of student-centered learning, which is the educational philosophy which I want to share with you today. So what is student-centered learning? Now, student-centered learning is a philosophy that places the student at the center of the learning process. And what that means, essentially, is that all of the educational needs, ranging from what is being taught to how it's being taught, is completely dictated by the student's needs. And in order to explain what exactly that means and why it's important, I want to start off by sharing with you my personal story and how student-centered learning has impacted my life. And then I want to go on and break down what student-centered learning is and how it is applicable and relevant and very important to every person in this audience today. So, when most people picture homeschoolers, usually something along the lines of this comes to mind. What most people do not imagine is something more like this. But my family, me and my siblings, were all homeschooled from a very young age, which means I had a very, very individualized education. And pretty much everything from what was being taught to how it was being taught was completely dictated by my individualized need. And because my family wasn't unique enough, in addition to being homeschoolers, we also were what we call Bali Tshuva, which means that we weren't always religious Orthodox Jews, but as we grew as a family, we grew in our religious practices and in our spirituality. And so while I had an amazing and full and wonderful secular education, my Jewish education was somewhat lacking, just because we didn't have the understanding or really the resources behind a proper Jewish education. And so at about the age of high school, we realized that I could no longer get everything at home and through these classes, and I was dual enrolled in a bunch of schools throughout Virginia, where I grew up. And for the first time in my life, I encountered anti-Semitism. And for the first time, I saw that not everyone loves Jews. And so while I was at home getting excited about being Jewish and taking on more and learning and really getting into it, I would go to school and I would be told that being Jewish is disgusting, that being Jewish is something you should be ashamed of. And I would go home and we'd be so excited and growing and increasing. And at school, I would be told that everything that you are doing is wrong. And it came to a point where I could no longer handle this conflict. I knew who I was and I knew where I wanted to go, and I wanted to have a proper Jewish education, and being where I was not conducive for such a thing. And so with my parents' support, we decided that what I was going to do is leave high school a little early, earn my GED, and take a gap year in Israel to learn Judaic studies. Now, most religious Orthodox Jews, between graduating high school and entering college, take a year, which is called seminary yeshiva year, where they go to Israel and they completely immerse themselves in Judaic studies. So in order to get out of this awful environment and to really understand what a proper Jewish education was, I decided that I was going to leave early, get a GED, and go to Israel. And that's what I did. And I show up the first day, and I'm in a foreign country. I don't know a single person. I don't speak the language, but that's okay because I'm excited and I'm ready to learn. And I show up to the first day classes, and I'm so ready to learn, and I'm so excited. And the rabbi gets to the front of the class, and he starts writing on the board. And I'm looking at the board, and I'm thinking, what is going on? Because I thought I knew Hebrew, but what he was writing did not look like Hebrew to me. So as it turns out, there's actually two different types of Hebrew. There's regular block Hebrew, which looks like this, and this is used for our prayers and our formal writings. And then there's an informal script Hebrew called ksav yad, which looks more like this. A little different, right? So the rabbi was at the front of the board writing down in ksav yad, which is a language that I couldn't possibly read. And I think, okay, no problem, I'm ready to learn, I'm excited, let's do this. I'm just going to listen really hard. And the rabbi turns around and he starts speaking, and he speaks in a language which we call Hebrewish, which means not quite English and not quite Hebrew, but somewhere in between. So about every fifth word is a Hebrew word that I completely don't understand. So he's writing in a language I can't read, and he's talking in a language that I hardly understand, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what am I doing? And I start looking around thinking, am I the only one? Is everyone else lost? And all the girls around me are sitting there with their notes and raising their hands and nodding along and really excited, and I start to completely melt down, because I'm thinking, what am I doing here? I can't read the language. I can't understand a word he's saying, and everyone else seems to know what's going on. And I start freaking out saying, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. Who was I kidding? But right before I was able to have a total and complete meltdown in the middle of class, I stopped, I took a deep breath, and I asked myself the question that 16 years of my education had taught me to ask myself. I asked myself, is this within my potential? Now, it's over 4 years later. I went on to spend not only 1, but 2 years in that school in Israel. Afterwards, I graduated with a bachelor's in Jewish education in Stern College. And I'm currently in my first year teaching Judaic studies for 5th grade in Rosenbaum Yeshiva, North Jersey. And I look back at that moment and at that question. And because the answer to that question was yes, now not only do I understand what that rabbi was talking about that day, but I actually teach what he was talking about. And all of this, all that I've done over these past few years, and all that's led me to this point, I really attest to that one moment and to that one question that my education taught me to ask. And it's this question and this mindset that I want to share with you today. So what exactly is student-centered learning? As I mentioned before, student-centered learning is an educational mindset which places the student at the center of the learning process. Now, some of you might be familiar with the term because most educators, if you go into the classroom, you ask them, do you use student-centered learning? They're going to tell you yes, and they wouldn't be lying. Because student-centered learning is the foundation of all progressive approaches, which means if you've heard of cooperative learning or inquiry-based learning or project-based learning or any of these progressive techniques, they all stem from this one philosophy of student-centered learning. And so what I'm sharing with you today is not necessarily one specific technique, but just overall a philosophy and a mindset. And in order to explain really what it is, I'm going to approach it like an educator and break it down into 2 main parts, the content and the mindset. When we talk about content and when we approach a student-centered based learning lesson, we ask ourselves 3 main questions. The first question is, why? Why is what I'm teaching today, or this week, or this year relevant and important? And then we make sure that our students know to ask and to understand why what they're learning is valuable and necessary and completely relevant. And then once we have our why, we next ask ourselves, what? What do I need to include in this lesson to make sure that my why is actualized? What content and information must be included to make sure that they come away with a lasting and valuable lesson? And then finally, the last question, which really made student-centered learning unique and important, is the how. How am I going to teach this in a way that every single one of my students' needs are met? And now what this means is that, let's say I have 2 students. And I have one student, her name is Sally, and she is such an outgoing girl. She loves to talk. If you let her, she would talk all day. And Sally, she really learns best when she's explaining things, when she's talking it out, when she's acting almost like the teacher. And then I have another student named Sam, and Sam is a very shy girl. She's much quieter, and she really enjoys learning by listening. She likes it when the teacher just tells her the information, and she's able to process it on her own. And so what I'll do is I'll create a collaborative exercise where Sally and Sam are going to work together, and in that way, Sally is able to talk it out and teach it and really explain it, and Sam is going to be able to listen. And in this way, they're both learning the exact same information but in a way that is best for both of them. That's the how. We take into account every student's needs and make sure that they're met. So that's with content. But what about mindset? Mindset really comes down to that one question which I mentioned before. Is this within my potential? And in order to explain this, we need to really understand a basic concept. See, nowadays in the world of education, we are told to measure our success based off others, which means that I might get a 90% on a test, and that's an amazing grade. But if every single other person in the class gets a 99, all of a sudden my 90% is now worthless. What student-centered learning does is it takes that concept and it throws it out the door. It says, forget this. Forget what others are doing. What you should look at is your potential alone. Where have you come from? What have you achieved? And what are your capabilities? We make sure every one of our students knows to measure themselves only based off what they can achieve and nothing else. So that's the content and that's the mindset. And I'm sure you're all sitting here thinking this is really nice and wonderful, sounds great, maybe I'll send my kid to a school that believes in this, but who cares, right? And that's really what I want to talk about today. Because there's one thing you all have in common here. Whether you're in kindergarten, or in preschool, or high school, or grad school, or you've graduated, or you're a doctor, a plumber, a lawyer, a mother, it does not matter. You all have one integral thing in common, and that is you are always and constantly in a state of growth. Because as the world around us changes and develops, we also have to change and develop and learn from our surroundings. And so at every single given moment, we are learning and we are adapting and we are changing. And it's my belief, based off my personal experiences, that if you take the concepts of student-centered learning and you apply it to the everyday growth process, that you can drastically change your life for the better. So how does it work? Let's break it down. We have our 4 main questions. First off, why? When you get up in the morning, ask yourself this important question. Why is what I'm doing today, this week, this year, or with my life important, invaluable, and necessary? Every single person in this room and in this world should be able to answer this question. Why is what I'm doing important? Next, your what. What do I need to do? What do I need to achieve today, tomorrow, next year? It doesn't matter, in order to make sure that my why is actualized. And finally, the how. You know yourself better than anyone else out there. How can you best achieve this? And while this is really nice, and you're going to ask yourself these first 3 questions, and you might get up in the morning and you're ready. You ask yourself why, what, and how. You're empowered, you're ready to go, and you go, 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 and you have a strong day, and you try really, really hard, and it's very possible that you still might fail. But no worries, it's fine, growth mindset, let's move on. And the next day you get up, you have your why, your what, and your how, and you try, and you try, and you try, and still, it's very possible that you might fail. 4 years ago, I had these questions answered. I knew my why. I wanted to learn Judaic studies. I wanted to be in an environment where I could be proud of being Jewish. I knew my what. I needed to leave my environment. I needed to make a big change. And finally, I had my how. I left high school early. I earned a GED. I went to a foreign country in a foreign school where I didn't know a single person. And despite all this, despite being empowered and knowing exactly where I was and why I was there, everything and everyone around me was screaming at me, you cannot do this. This is impossible. And that is when the final and most important question came into play. Is this within my potential? Because you can get up any day and have your why, your what, and your how and be ready to go. But when you hit that brick wall, and when everything seems completely impossible, ask yourself this final question. Is it within my potential? Look at all that you've achieved, how far you've come, what you've done to be who you are, where you are today. And look at all the unique capabilities that you undoubtedly have. And if you do this, you ask yourself these questions, and you ask yourself, is it within my potential? There is absolutely nothing and no one that can stop you.